Well, as you know, we've had the first death from coronavirus, as Trudy has pointed out. That's the first one recorded in Australia, in West Australia today, as 2 travel bans remain in place. Now, we mentioned there the economic impact and, of course, on the travel industry as well. The economic impact is being felt right across the globe, not just here. How destructive will this be for economies, especially the travel industry? For more, I am joined by the airport economist, Tim Harcourt, and Steve Westaway, Executive Director of the Oz Tourism Industry Council. Thank you to you both for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Tim, let me start with you first. Are there any industry sectors that are not impacted by the spread of this virus?
Well, I guess domestic industries predominantly, but as we know, when you look at tourism, education, seafood, agriculture, China's been so important that it's likely that's going to, come right through to the Australian economy. And it was good what Dan Tehan said. I work at the University of New South Wales, and we've got Chinese students here in Sydney. We've got Chinese students still back in China, and it's important we look after their welfare and the welfare of all our other students, Australian and overseas, to ensure it's not contagious. And what we've said to students on Chinese TV is that you're coming here for a 4-year degree, or maybe more. A few weeks here and there to study online is really worth it, rather than take a risk. So I think that's an important thing to take in mind. I welcome Dan Tehan's comments on your program.
So that's really interesting, Tim. Many of these people who had to start their first semester have actually started their semester, but might be sitting in a Chinese city or town somewhere.
Exactly right. I mean, last time I guess I was on Sky talking about this, we talked about coronavirus has just been really Wuhan, 11 million people, the Chicago of East Asia, so a very important industrial city, Chris. But now we've got Iran, we've got Northern Italy. We've seen this spread because of globalisation. So it is important that we look after our students who are sitting in China right now, in Wuhan or Shanghai or in Qingdao, but also our Chinese students that are in Australia, and indeed all our students, Australian or overseas, because we basically want to contain this as much as possible and act in a responsible way.
I'd be interested whether you're hearing what I heard yesterday from a fellow who has kids, Australian kids in American universities, that while this is going on, American universities are pitching for the business of Chinese students who were intending to come to Australia.
I wouldn't surprise me. I haven't heard that directly, but I certainly know that the coronavirus has seen a lot of different industries pitch. There's been some pretty good Australian tourism ads on at the moment, I've noticed as well, and that tends to happen. But I think for the most part, Australian universities are still very attractive to Chinese students, and that's going to continue, particularly after this crisis is over, Chris.
OK, Steve Westaway, what part of the travel industry is hurting most? I know it's across the board, but certainly the airlines are bleeding, aren't they?
Oh yes, good evening. Yes, look, the airlines are really doing it hard. I mean, both Qantas Group and Virgin Australia went to market with their interim results and outlined, tens of millions of dollars of likely, impact to their bottom line in the current half year moving forward. I mean, the Australian tourism industry, or the visitor economy, as we like to now sort of categorise it, all up, it's about a $150 billion sector, of which the domestic market makes up about 100 of that 150 billion, and the remainder comes from our international visitors. Now, we were running at record volumes year in, year out, headlined by China, 1.4 million in rounded terms, short-term annual arrivals to this country, and they spread pretty widely. Whilst the Chinese visitors do tend to hub and come in around the major capitals, Sydney, Melbourne, and through southeast Queensland, they do disperse. And so what we've found is our tourism industry is made up of about 310,000 registered businesses, and the vast bulk of those are small enterprises, in many cases micro businesses of five or under. So it's these been small business entities, particularly in our regions, out of far north Queensland, around Cairns, Gold Coast, but we've seen a lot of impact as well down into New South Wales and down into South Australia as well as Victoria. And it's not a pretty picture, and we're a resilient sector, but it's a tough time.
Chinese are high-profile group travellers. They do a lot of group travelling, especially to Australia. Is that hurting the most?
That's a great question. So the market used to be very group orientated. In fact, the bulk of the Chinese visitors up until probably about a decade ago came in as a group. As I said, you often see people following a flag around our capital cities, and that's sort of the way I guess the market has emerged. It's very much gone the other way now. So the groups are important. About a quarter of all of our Chinese visitors that come in annually come in on a endorsed or a registered group. The remainder come in as free independent travellers, and that's made up of students. To Tim's point, people that are coming in visiting friends and relatives. Australia has around 1.3 million of people who live here now of direct Chinese heritage, and also then there's the remaining bulk are free independent travellers. So mum and dad, families, individuals that are coming through and visiting our country, often for up to 2 weeks, and spending somewhere between $4,000 to $4,500 out of their own pocket once they get here. So they're very valuable, about a $12.3 billion segment of our market.
Yeah, vanishing for the time being at least. Tim Harcourt, are we staring down the barrel of a recession?
Wouldn't quite say that yet, Chris, but it's pretty hard, and I feel for the tourism sector, having the bushfires impacting particularly in terms of domestic tourism, and then having this affecting international tourism. It's pretty tough for tourism at the moment, and seafood and agriculture. I still think that the Wall Street and the stock market were very strong, and there has been a correction, and there's still a long way to go. We're still 6% off the peak that we've had, so I still think it's too early to say that, but it's certainly something we have to manage very carefully and very responsibly, Chris.
The Prime Minister keeps indicating that our economy is robust enough to handle these circumstances. Do you agree?
Well, it is robust. It is resilient, particularly in the tourism sector. I'm speaking at a tourism conference with Simon Birmingham in a couple of weeks to see that firsthand. I think, Chris, in some ways, the coronavirus and the bushfires can let Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg wiggle out from this surplus pledge, this back in black pledge that they made on the eve of the election. They really can let that go now, and I think the Australian people would forgive them for having a stimulus package right now to avoid adverse economic impact from the bushfires and the coronavirus.
Back to travel, Steve Westerway. Has this gone down as bad as 9/11 on travel, SARS? It's worse than SARS, but how does it compare with the travel hiatus that occurred after 9/11?
Oh, it's going to rival 9/11. I mean, 9/11, obliterated markets for a period of time, and at the end of the day, people started to travel again. And once the safety piece came in, and everybody viewed it was okay to get planes back up into the sky, things got moving again pretty quickly. This will be worse than 9/11. It's much worse than SARS. This is pretty hard because there's a little bit of unknown here now. We've seen the way the coronavirus has started to spread, and the pocket that's emerged out of Italy over the past week is very disturbing. You saw the government yesterday, over the weekend, have announced a travel ban as of today from Iran. Now, Iran's around about 11,000 inbound a year market, so the complete opposite end of the scale to the Chinese market, which of course we've had the border shut for about 5 weeks, and likely, we believe, at least another few weeks. And at some point that'll have to be reviewed. Italy's a big market, a little bit under 100,000. I mean, South Korea is a top 10 visitor market, almost 300,000 visitors, and even Japan, as we know, has had spots of coronavirus, and it's almost a $500,000 visitor market. I mean, we are an economy which is absolutely open to the world. We're connected. Tourism is our largest services export. We are resilient. To Tim's point, we are a resilient sector. I think the time has come around stimulus. There was a stimulus package announced by the Commonwealth towards the end of January around the bushfires, and those bushfires were impactful. We believe around about a $6.5 billion brand damage to our economy in terms of the impact globally. Huge stuff. And coronavirus, I mean, the industry's been taking it, but we know that we have to have a clean border. It's critical because in many ways the pivot, as we get out of this stew that we're in, we need to be able to pivot as an industry. And if we've got a country which in essence is coronavirus free, there's no person-to-person contracting of coronavirus as I sit here tonight talking to you, and that's been the case since through this whole saga. That puts us in a very good position moving forward, and really the industry is starting to look that way. We obviously were a bit stunned by the decision around China, respected the decision, but obviously it was a difficult one as our largest market, and of course it's our largest trading partner. But you know, the time's coming where we do need to think about around how we can help, particularly our small business tourism operators, and as well as the larger hotel chains as well, who are doing it really tough. The airlines, you know, they can be nimble in how they reduce capacity, but they're also impacted, and we're seeing the changes come through. You know, the impact is significant. It's upwards of $2 billion. You know, we can't see how this won't be anything under about a $3 to $4 billion hit if we don't see a lift in the current situation by June.
One final question to you, Tim Harcourt. I know we've said that these are the worst case scenarios and this is the status at the moment, but having said all of that, we keep hearing from health authorities, oh, we've got case number 25. Well, the truth of the matter is we've lost a life, which is awful, but we've only got about 4 or 5 cases in the country that actually have the coronavirus. The other, like 20, they've gone home, they're continuing on with life because they've got better. And I just wonder, for the sake of confidence, whether we could start looking at the net problem we have rather than the gross problem we've accrued.
It's a good point. You know, I've always thought that the fear of coronavirus is bigger than coronavirus itself. I mean, if you look at Australia, we've actually been very responsible. We've handled the outbreak quite well, as you say. We've been quite responsible, as have citizens. A lot of Chinese restaurants are empty because Chinese Australians are staying home, or they're back in China, being very careful not to patronise them. So I actually think we've behaved very, very well. And of course, really, Australia's at the forefront of finding a vaccine. We've seen the medical scientists in Queensland doing that. So I actually think we might actually be part of the solution to coronavirus with our great medical technology that we've seen exported around the world. And also, I mean, I agree, it's like having good quarantine. You know, having good, clean and green, healthy environment is good for your education system, for your tourism system, as well as agriculture. So I think Australia, keeping its reputation as being a healthy place with good quarantine laws, can only be good going forwards as an open economy.
Yeah, too right. A bit of positivity too to end our discussion together. Tim Harcourt, Steve Westaway, thank you so much for your time this evening.